Let me ask you a question. How many of you became project managers because you wanted to manage projects? And how many of you at some point realized that the job wasn't really about managing projects at all? Because that's something I've learned over the last 30 years. When you're starting out, project management feels quite straightforward. You've got a plan, you've got milestones, you've got the risks, you've got the budget, you've got the team, you've got a Gantt chart. For at least the first few weeks, everything looks remarkably healthy. And you think, right, I've got this. Then you get more senior, and suddenly the Gantt chart isn't the difficult bit anymore. The difficult bit is the conversation you're having with the person who controls the budget, or the conversation you're avoiding with the senior stakeholder who doesn't agree with the strategy, or the sponsor who has promised something to the board that your team can't realistically deliver. Or how about this? The executive who walks into the room 5 minutes before the steering committee meeting and says, I've just spoken to the CEO, they want this delivered 3 months earlier. Now, nobody mentioned that in the project plan. And that's when you realize something. The project is rarely the hardest thing you're managing. It's the environment around the project. Now, I've spent over 30 years working in project and program delivery. Across that time, I've been involved in delivering more than £300 million worth of complex change. And I've worked in environments where the pressure was real. Tight deadlines, big budgets, senior stakeholders, competing priorities, politics, uncertainty. And the people who genuinely believed that they were right. And through all this, I've learnt a lesson that I wish someone had taught me much earlier in my career. Being excellent at delivering projects doesn't automatically make you an excellent strategic leader. They're related, but they're not the same thing. And that's really what I want to talk to you about today. The moment the job changes, there is a point in most project managers' careers where something changes. You become experienced. People trust you with bigger projects. Your team gets bigger. The budgets get bigger. The stakeholders become more senior. And you think, this is it. I'm progressing. And you are. But then you discover that the rules have changed. Because earlier in your career, you were rewarded for being the person who had all the answers. You knew the plan, you knew the numbers, you knew the risks, you knew what was happening. People came to you because you knew how to get things done. But the more senior you become, the less valuable it is to simply have all the answers. Instead, people start looking at you and asking, what do you think we should do? That's a completely different question. They're not asking you to manage something, they're asking you to lead something. And that's the transition that can become uncomfortable, because nobody really gives you a manual for that. You don't get promoted and suddenly receive a handbook called congratulations, here's how to navigate executive politics. You have to work it out. And most of us worked out through experience. Sometimes good experience, sometimes painful experience. So who do I help? That's really why I've become so passionate about this. I work with experienced project and program managers, people who are already good at what they do. I'm not interested in teaching someone how to build a project plan. I'm not going to tell you what a RAID log is. You've already got that. You've probably got several. You may even have a RAID log to manage your RAID log. The people I work with are already capable. They've delivered, they've dealt with difficult stakeholders, they've worked under pressure, they've probably rescued projects that other people had given up on. But they're at a point where they know I need to operate differently if I want to get to the next level. And that is the transition I'm interested in, from delivery manager to strategic leader. Because here's what I've noticed. A project manager can be incredibly busy and still not be particularly influential. You can spend 60 hours a week managing a project and still not be involved in the conversations that determine its success. You can have the responsibility without authority, accountability without influence, and sometimes you can even be accountable for decisions you had absolutely no involvement in making. The strategy was agreed, the budget was committed, the deadline was announced, the promise was made, and then someone says, let's get a project manager in to deliver it. And suddenly it's your problem. Now, that's not a project management problem, that's a leadership problem, because the strategic project leader doesn't just ask, how are we going to deliver this project? They ask, should we be doing this? What are we assuming? What are the consequences? What are we trading off? What does the organization actually need? And sometimes the most valuable thing a project leader can do is stop everyone in the room and say, before we agree to this, can we just think about what we're actually committing ourselves to? That's leadership. But here's the difficult part. You can know all this intellectually and still struggle to do it. Because when you're sitting across the table from a CEO, a CFO, a board member, or a very powerful sponsor, it's easy to think, who am I to challenge this? I felt that. And I'm guessing at some point you have too. You walk into the room with your analysis. You know the numbers, you know the risks, you know the delivery reality. But someone senior says something completely with confidence, and suddenly your carefully prepared challenge disappears. You think maybe I'm wrong, or maybe this isn't my place, or I'll raise it later. And sometimes later is the most expensive word in project management, because later the decision has been made. The commitment has been announced, the organisation has moved on, and now you're expected to deliver it. That's where executive presence comes in, and I think executive presence is one of the most misunderstood concepts in leadership. You see, people think it's about confidence, or being charismatic, or something impressive. It isn't. For me, executive presence is much simpler. It's about being able to walk into a difficult conversation and make people think this person understands what matters here. Not just what matters to the project, but what matters to the business. That's a different perspective. A project manager might say, we're 3 weeks behind schedule. A strategic leader says, we're 3 weeks behind, here's why, here's the impact on the business, and here are decisions we need to make now. Same information, completely different leadership. Then there's influence, and this is another big one. Because the higher you go, the less formal authority you often have. Your project might depend on people who don't report to you. You might need a finance director to release funding, an operations director to change a process, a technology director to prioritize your work, a senior executive to make a decision. None of them work for you. So you can't simply say, can you please do this by Friday? Well, you can, but good luck with that. You have to understand people, what matters to them, what they're worried about, what they're trying to achieve, what they stand to lose, who influences them. And when you have that conversation, that's what I mean by political intelligence. And I want to be very clear about something. Political intelligence isn't manipulation. It's not playing games. It's not being political in the negative sense. It's understanding the human system in which your project exists. Because projects don't fail in isolation. They fail inside organizations. And organizations are made up of people. So what does that transition actually look like? For me, it's a shift in identity. You move from I'm responsible for delivering this project to I'm responsible for helping this organization achieve the outcome this project is supposed to create. That's a massive shift. You stop seeing yourself as the person who manages the work. You start seeing yourself as the person who helps shape the conditions for success. You start asking better questions. You start thinking commercially. You become more comfortable challenging assumptions. You become more deliberate about your relationships. You become more confident in your executive conversations. And you stop trying to prove that you're the cleverest person in the room. And you start trying to make the room make a better decision. That's strategic leadership. And this is why I do what I do. The people I help are experienced project and program managers. People who have already proved they can deliver. What I want to help them become is strategic leaders, executives trust. People who are invited into conversations earlier. People whose judgment is valued. People who can influence without authority. People who walk into a difficult executive conversation and hold their own. People who aren't just brought in to deliver someone else's decision, they're trusted to help shape the decision. And why does that matter? Because that's where the opportunities change. That's where the size of importance of the work changes. That's where your visibility changes. That's where your career can change. I've seen people make the transition and go into much more senior roles. And yes, promotions matter. Of course they do. But I don't think the promotion is actually the most important part. The most important part is that you become capable of operating at the level before someone gives you the title. Because the title should be the consequence of the way you operate, not the thing that gives you permission to start operating differently. And one final thought. If you're taking nothing else from this today, I'd like you to think about one question. Not how do I become a better project manager? You probably already know how to do that. Instead, ask yourself, what would I do differently if I saw myself as a strategic leader? Would you speak differently in the next steering committee? Would you challenge a decision earlier? Would you spend more time understanding your stakeholders? What would stop you giving executive information and start giving them insight? Would you have the conversation you've been avoiding? Would you start thinking about the organization's problem rather than just your project's problem? Because that's the transition from managing delivery to shaping outcomes, from being accountable for the plan to influencing the decisions behind the plan, from being the person executives ask to deliver to becoming the person they ask, what do you think we should do? And for me, that's the real journey. Project manager to strategic leader.